And thank you for having me. It's always fun to connect with people who are doing interesting things from all over the world. So I'm Shannon Lucas, co-founder and co-CEO of Catalyst Constellations. I have spent the last 20 years doing corporate innovation, startup creation, and culture change at some of the world's largest companies like Cisco, Ericsson from Sweden, Microsoft, Vodafone. And I specialize in helping large organizations sort of imagine the new challenges and then implement the new modalities and frameworks that they will need to sort of recognize those new visions as soon as possible. My business partner is Tracy Lovejoy. She also spent 12 years at Microsoft, although we didn't know each other then. She's an ethnographer and researcher by training, social scientist. And she was doing user research and ethnography for Microsoft back before that was really a thing. And when she left Microsoft, she decided to become a coach. And as she was becoming a coach, most coaches are often encouraged to sort of find their niche. And so she started studying, using her amazing ethnographic superpowers, the people that she loved working with. And as she was going on that process, she identified this new category, and she went and she looked back at all of sort of the ethnographic research, and this category had not been clearly articulated before. And that category is called catalysts. So our mission is to co-create a global movement where catalysts are recognized, valued, and empowered to thrive while creating meaningful change. So what is a catalyst? A catalyst is a person or a thing that causes a change or an action. And we also think that they are the change makers with an unstoppable drive to action that are brimming with ideas to make the world a better place. So other sort of synonyms, maybe disruptor, change maker, are often told that we're troublemakers from a very early age. As Tracy was doing this, I was one of the people that she was researching. And I was like, this explains a lot to me, because at that particular time, I was in the process of creating the Innovation Champion program from scratch at Vodafone. And I grew that from sort of a ragtag group of about 8 positive troublemakers to a CEO-sponsored and certified gamified program, innovation program with 5 levels with innovation champions from all over the world. Now, these were volunteer positions, so people had to want to do it anyway. They had to lean in. They had to get VP and direct managerial approval, and they had to apply. So there's an application and sorting process there. But even as we were going through all of that, it became really obvious that not all of the innovation champions were created equally, which was frustrating, because how do you support this wide range of how people are showing up in an already kind of small self-selected group? And so when Tracy started explaining what catalysts were, I was like, that makes so much sense. That explains a lot. I had this pool of change agents, and change agents are super important, sort of all over the normal distribution curve. But being able to identify this small subset of catalysts within the change agent world is really important. I had these like 10 people who would show up for every call. They would try and run with their own programs. They were pushing me to, even move faster than I did, and I moved pretty damn fast. And so me having the understanding about what made these catalysts, drive and move and how to support them was really helpful. So we've identified 6 attributes from the catalyst research. We pieced together information really quickly. We synthesize it from lots of different sources. So Conversations, Wired, an art gallery, like we can synthesize the dots from anywhere in our lives. And from that, we start to see the signal through the noise in a way that a lot of people don't. So we start to generate all of these ideas. Well, what if, we can even stand in line at Starbucks actually and see how we could improve the user experience as we're standing there. Maybe nothing that we execute on, but we see these sort of infinite possibilities of how the world can be better. From that, we start to, particularly when we have a personal purpose that's connected to it, we start to create the actual visions about what needs to change. Now, all of those things could be defined as a visionary, and a super important distinction for a catalyst is this action that transforms. And this action is almost like a physical need to see the thing realized in the world. And for me, this is one of the biggest differentiators of the catalyst versus the broader change agent group, is that deep physical need to move into action to see the transformation. Catalysts are intuitive, and they're perceived as being comfortable with risk and ambiguity. I've had this said about me a lot of times, but I'm just like, I see the data. I might not have presented it in the McKinsey research output that you want, but it doesn't feel risky to me because I've done all of the synthesis and I have a lot of clarity that this is where we need to go. And finally, we're almost born with an experimentation mindset. So when catalysts bump up against things like design thinking or theory U or lean startup, they're like, oh, there's a name that describes what I wake up and do every day. And so we often end up in fields where that's what we're being asked to do, and we can bring that superpower. So a couple of questions just to sort of figure out if you or anyone you know is a catalyst. Do you constantly see how things could be done better and have a drive to make that action or that vision a reality? Are you often a few steps ahead of others, even if you're in the same meeting? So this happens to me all the time. We're in the same meeting and I turn left and I go start actioning and all the people turned right. And I'm like, I thought we were in the same meeting and agreed about what needed to be done at what speed. Do you sometimes have so many ideas you could never possibly do them all? Do people who work with you describe you as a risk taker even though it doesn't feel risky? Or maybe they describe you as being intuitive. And when tackling challenges, do you try different approaches to figure out which is most effective? For catalysts, sometimes understanding and trying new processes is as rewarding as the outcome that we get from having tried those new processes. If you answered yes to every question, you're definitely a catalyst. And sometimes there's a range. So there's sort of a range of catalyticness. So maybe you don't want to wear the risk, mantle, and that's okay. But hopefully this gives you some context. So I'll just stop. Is this resonating with people? Do we have any catalysts on the call here?
You have one.
Yeah. We have a couple. Yes. Okay.
I'm a messy catalyst.
I was guessing based on your intros, but I never want to assume. So we have an important role to play right now as we're creating that global movement, which is helping people understand why catalysts matter. I'm guessing at some point you guys have come across VUCA, but just in case, VUCA came out in the 1980s, has been increasingly popularized as a way to think about the post-Cold War world. I've been talking about it since, when Nikki was coming to Vodafone. And the VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And while it came out in the 1980s, I think it started to get even more traction when we started to be able to digitally connect everything, because it actually did increase the speed of change and the uncertainty and the ambiguity. Tiny little startups now could become globally dominant companies in a couple of years because they had access to this technology. And of course, so we've been talking about this for a long time. Companies have not really been paying attention to this for the most part, even though things like climate change and global refugees and the previous financial crisis should have made them do so. But as we were pulling together the decks this spring, it was like, well, VUCA is definitely here, and that's the picture of COVID on the bottom, right? I mean, we cannot deny anymore that we're living in this VUCA world. This isn't just us saying this. I mean, it's in HBR, it's in Forbes, it's in everyone. And if companies don't address VUCA, everyone is pretty clear that they could perish. So they need to be able to respond to this new VUCA world. What a lot of companies are doing is they're bringing in McKinsey to help them with their change management program, to think about the different scenario planning, or bringing in Accenture and thinking about how they engage, with HR and their employees in new and different ways. These aren't bad, but the McKinsey formulas tend to be, starting from a one-size-fits-all with a small amount of customization. But the bigger problem with both of these models is that they don't talk about the role of the individual humans in this. They may sort of go after broad categories of the change agents, but not understanding A, that there are people who are pretty much literally VUCA born ready, and then B, understanding the toll that being that catalyst in that organization can take on the individual. If we think about VUCA, there's a VUCA Prime that was created by Bob Johansson, who started the Institute for the Future. And he said, this is what we need in terms of a skill set or response to living in a VUCA world. So we need people who can create visions, who have understanding, who can generate clarity, and are agile. And so if you think about how I already defined a catalyst, that is 100% how catalysts operate. But the most important thing is we don't stop there. We bring an action to transform and respond to this new VUCA world, and we do it at speed. So we've done some research about all of the things, the attributes that the researchers, the VUCA researchers are talking about, again, going back to all the HBR, Forbes articles, research, et cetera. And these are some of the skills that they say that we need to bring into our organizations to be VUCA ready. I'll let you look at them, but things like situational awareness, learning agility, focus on innovation, adaptability, things like metacognition. At the end of last year, beginning of this year, we did another round of research in the Catalyst community and said, how do you articulate your superpowers? And this is how they responded. And it's literally a one-for-one response to how the world is talking about what we need to have to be VUCA ready and to address our new reality. So being intuitive, bringing in empathy, deep self-awareness, having the skills for co-creation combined with strategy and analysis. Dot connecting is one of those ones that is a struggle for Catalyst because it's one of our superpowers. But if you ask an executive sort of, what makes a great change leader, this isn't always top of their mind because it feels a little fuzzy. But when we marry these self-reported attributes against how the world is articulating how we need to respond to VUCA, there's a clear correlation here. And finally, when catalysts are supported, they make huge impact. So these are just a couple of examples of the catalysts who are in our network that we work with. One woman was brought into one of the largest healthcare companies in the US, and one of her goals was to become one of the most ethical companies. And not only did they achieve that a year ahead of schedule. Another person was appointed governor appointee, trying to transform community college to workforce outcomes. And she completely transformed an academic/governmental system, which, as you guys can imagine, is not easy. And in the process, she grew the funding from $100 million when she got there to $1 billion when she left. Another catalyst worked at EMC and helped lead the multi-billion-dollar spinout that was called VCE between VMware, EMC, and Cisco. We have a person who brought design thinking into the Department of Labor, and her ambition, her definition of success was if we get like 10 teams to sign up, we'll count that as success. The first round, they got over 100, and they partnered with the White House and had a celebration, celebrating design thinking in government, which was focused on the users in a way that it never had been before. We have someone at one of the world's largest enterprise furniture companies who embedded, again, design thinking, and they increased their new product hit rate in the core product line in a way that they had never been able to do before. And also thinking about, there's this one gentleman who started off his life recognizing that he wanted to do big, bold things, and he wanted to give himself the financial freedom to do that. So before right now he's working with NASA and all of these people to create this new space station solution, which is amazing. But before he did that, he created a real estate business that doubled its growth every year and had double-digit growth beyond that, so that he could just have the financial freedom to pursue what he wanted to do. So when catalysts are successful, we are hugely impactful. But if we go back to, okay, so how do we support catalysts on this journey? Catalysts are people too, and I don't want to present us as being the saviors and total superheroes, although we like to think that we are, but we have our own challenges. Some of the challenges that we have include, we can get impatient with people. We move at speed and we're like, why can't you see this vision? Why are we still talking about this? We can have a challenge prioritizing things. We have so many good ideas. Which ones do we park right now? Because that can feel really bad, just taking our little idea babies away from us. We can be seen as being arrogant because when we see the vision, we see it so clearly that our sense of belief in it is really strong, but we're also often wearing sort of an imposter syndrome or having self-doubt. Because by definition, we are almost always in uncharted territory, and we're like, well, no one's ever done this before. Who the hell am I to sort of create this new reality in the world? We have a challenge getting across ideas, which is really important. So once we see the vision, we want to move forward. And this happens to me constantly. This happened to me at Ericsson. I would share the vision with the team, and I would get to the end. And I was like, does anyone have any questions? And I would wait for 20 minutes, literally, for people to ask questions, only to have people later leave the room and say they didn't really understand it or whatever. And that's because sometimes it can take up to 20 times for people to hear the information, especially when it's really net new, for them to even understand it enough to ask questions. You can see some of the other challenges here, but basically the consequences of all of this lead to burnout for the catalysts. They leave us feeling isolated for all of the reasons I just mentioned. And we have this lack of clarity that sometimes even for ourselves is like, well, I see the vision, but how do I get it to implemented? So as we have studied the catalyst population, we've understood that there's a pretty common energy curve that catalysts go through. We're problem solvers by definition. And so if we get a big juicy problem that we get to go, gnaw our teeth on, we get this mania about where we're sensing all the data, who we need to talk to, what new conferences we're going to need to go to. And that first part, as we're like ingesting all of this, it's like a euphoria almost. And it starts to slow down a little bit as we're coming to clarity. But in this process, what often happens to us is we are so all in that we leave behind our normal sort of rejuvenation practices. So you're working 12-hour days, you don't go to the gym for a couple days, you're traveling to get all the stakeholders on board, you're not going to your normal yoga class, you haven't caught up with your friends and had just a glass of wine to catch up. And you're feeling great though, because you're like, I am getting so much energy from tackling this problem that it's, that's fine. I don't need to go to yoga this week. But then we hit the orchestration phase. And this is generally the most painful phase for us, which is, no, we have to sit everyone down 20 more times, 19 more times, and make sure that they understand. We have to go around and make sure we're bringing our empathy skills to understand what all the wins are for all of the people around the organization. And this is the piece where it's like, we need to understand and bring together all of the people so that this thing can become a reality, because we are very seldomly the person who takes it all the way across the finish line. So now our energy is starting to drain, but we're still sort of net positive. It isn't as euphoric, but we're still sort of net positive. But almost inevitably, the corporate immune response system or some other form of resistance gets in our way, whether it's the customers aren't buying it, our hypothesis isn't right, the investors don't want to invest in us, the CFO says that the timelines for return are too long, whatever it is, we start to get this resistance. This resistance can often be delivered in ways from other people that are very painful for us, because catalysts often have such a strong personal connection. Remember, I said earlier, it's like a physical need to see that thing out in the world, that we can't separate the thing that we're trying to create from our own personal identity. And so as people start attacking the idea, and some people even attack us personally, it can start to lead to trauma. And all of this eventually often leads to burnout. So the question becomes, we have, I think, made the case that catalysts are valuable and that we need them in this new VUCA world. And we've seen how they operate. So the question becomes, let's start with, for the leaders, how do we support catalysts? There's some tactical things that you can do. First, you have to identify and connect them. So we talked about isolation being one of the challenges that catalysts have. They're often like the lone wolf in an organization. The more that you can connect your catalysts, the more energy that they will get and the more skill building that they can do, even just by sharing their best practices and wins. But you can also, and this is what we're doing, provide specific training and development. And you'll see in a minute, like there's these ways, these sort of constant ways that catalysts show up and create change, but they're sort of unconscious competencies right now for a lot of people. So A, having them self-identify, and then B, supporting them to amplify their superpowers, but also to work around their blind spots can make them much more successful. Engaging the catalysts with the VUCA programs early. So, we believe that this is a great sort of petri dish as you're working with McKinsey or an Accenture or whoever you're doing your scenario planning with. You have these people who aren't going to be afraid to try 4 different modalities and 4 different visions to help the future of your company. And they will actually thrive and feel completely supported, even sometimes if it feels like, and it actually is more work, because this is what they were born to do. Providing actual creative and unstructured time. So a lot of people know that Google used to do this. They don't really do it anymore, but it's a genius idea, which is forcing someone to sit down and come up with their creative idea to give you a PowerPoint in 2 days is not going to get you the most generative ideas. And I have often found in my work that people don't understand the time it takes to do the dot connecting and the network building, and it takes energy too. So if we can give them some sort of unstructured space and time, it's partly in recognition that you need these foundations to generate the new ideas. And finally, and this is difficult for people because you don't know what you don't know, considering different metrics or KPIs or incentive structures for catalysts. If what you're asking your catalyst to do is create something net new, then the quarterly earnings that you're asking the rest of the organization to, to work towards probably don't make sense for the catalyst. And this can lead to sort of that downward spiral of energy because they're working their butts off, but they're not actually sometimes meeting the metrics that you've set for the organization. So just thinking a little bit differently, maybe it's a yes and, but giving some recognition to the work that they're doing that will be the future state of KPIs. Personal ways as a leader that you can support your catalysts. The biggest one is self-awareness. And this is hard to ask leaders to do. Everyone thinks that they're self-aware. The self-awareness is foundational because it empowers things like psychological safety. So if the leader always thinks that they have the answers and there's no room for dissension, but you're hiring someone to come in and provide new ideas, is it safe to do that? And a lot of these are for all people. Like, I just want to be clear with that. Who doesn't want psychological safety in a boss who's self-aware? But it's particularly critical when you have people who are almost by definition operating outside of the normal structures of the organization, as we just saw. As a leader, sharing your own iterations and failings. So as Tracy and I are building this company, as an example, we've been very transparent with the community about how we've been, pivoting and things that we put out there that didn't work. And we constantly get feedback from the community about how it's such a relief for people, and it helps them let go of their imposter syndrome because they can see other people who are actually building a successful company go through some of these challenges. As a leader, leaning into difficult conversations. So when catalysts are most successful is when they have a boss or a manager that they can either say, look, you asked me to work with these 10 people to develop our COVID response, but these 10 people only want to go back to the normal way of working. And so if a leader can, this is combined with psychological safety, hold space for those difficult conversations and actively cultivate different perspectives, catalysts will feel more willing and safe in terms of bringing their new ideas or their dissenting ideas to the table, which can be really healthy for the organization. And finally, and this is a hard one, and again, this goes back to self-awareness, is taking the time to understand the catalyst superpowers, to understand their blind spots and support them in both of those things, but also their energy curve. Like as you see your catalyst start to dip down, some form of resistance is going on in the organization, and having a manager who can step in and say, hey, maybe it's time to go take 2 days off because you've been working 60, 70-hour weeks because you're a catalyst and you've been in the mania phase. And B, how can I step in to understand what is that resistance that's causing the downward spiral in your energy? So for how to support catalysts for themselves, the first piece of this is self-awareness about how we operate and bringing this unconscious competence to consciousness. So as I mentioned before, we sort of were born creating visions, moving into action, taking the feedback, iterating and reinforming the vision. We don't always do this consciously. So if we can take more time to create the vision, as an example, and make sure we have a lot more clarity so that we can bring people along, it will smooth out the process for us. If we can clearly articulate all of the steps of action that we need to take, we can stop some of our magical thinking. Catalysts often think that they can get 20 times done what they can actually get done in a day or a week or 6 months. And so you can plot out the actual action steps that you need to take, which also becomes important later because when catalysts are successful, the definition of catalyst being successful is basically when someone or some other part of the organization has made it their own. It was like something taboo that you couldn't talk about before, and it's become so normalized now that people forget where it started with. And so if you can clearly demonstrate where the vision came from and your action steps that helped make it a reality, we can start to more articulately demonstrate the value of the catalysts. And also iterate with intentionality. So some fast iterations will be comfortable for some parts of your organization or maybe your team, But exposing too much of your iteration process can actually cause fear in other people because it may look like to them you don't know what you're doing. Importantly for Catalyst in this whole container needs to be contained in a sort of bubble of rejuvenation, compassion, and empathy. So one of our superpowers is that we move at speed. One of our challenges is that we move at speed. As I mentioned before, we often give up our own regenerative practices at the beginning of that cycle because we're in that high state of mania. And when you're down in the trough on the bottom of that energy curve, it's really hard to feel like you can, yeah, I can fit my yoga class in, because we're often still working so hard that we have no time for ourselves. So making sure we have a constant rejuvenation practice, whatever that is, can at least elongate the frequency and deepen and lessen the amplitude of that energy curve. Having self-compassion is also an important part of this. Like I said, it can feel really badly for the catalyst when someone's attacking our ideas or even attacking ourselves because they're afraid of the ideas. So having the self-compassion for, hey, no one's ever done this before. This idea isn't me as much as I am tied to it. And also having compassion for when you aren't good in your rejuvenation practices. Just say, okay, let's build an atomic habit of a 5-minute mindfulness practice every day if that's all that I can do. And what that spaciousness allows us to do, in addition to, we know scientifically how spaciousness enables creativity and divergent thinking, is it also allows us to bring empathy to the people that we're working with. And this cannot be overstretched, because we can, like I said, be seen as being arrogant, as moving too fast, as not understanding what the wins are for all of our different stakeholders. And if we're spun up in the action of trying to solve all of the problems and we don't have that rejuvenation and spaciousness, we'll forget to just sit down and listen to people. So we also need, as sort of the catalyst ourselves, just like we're asking our bosses to pay attention to our energy curves, be honest with ourselves about where we are and what's going on. And this is where those moments of mindfulness every day can become really handy. You have a prioritized list of things that you're doing. Are they in service of that vision that you stated? And if you're starting to get resistance, is there a pause that you can take to go back to the beginning of the vision cycle, bring in your empathy, and hopefully sort of flatten out this curve, because you're not getting the resistance that you were without the pause? So we have sort of on the clarity side for Catalyst tools, starting with the manifesto. That can be scary for people, like, hey, I'm going to create a company to support Catalyst and create a global movement. That big, bold ambition can be scary, but when you start to share it with your secret tribe, you'll get the feedback and it becomes less scary every time you say it. We help Catalyst create an action map. So moving from that high level, sort of manifesto or vision to, no, how am I going to get from here today to 2 years and have all of the steps in between? And it's a great tool to take and get sort of, agreement and buy-in and get other stakeholders' fingerprints and their sense of ownership with you. And developing that network stakeholder map. All of those examples that I shared with you, and when catalysts are successful, one of the defining things is that they have a stakeholder supporter somewhere that believed in them, that they could follow, that gave them the cover that they needed. On the rejuvenation side, we encourage people to actually fill in a rejuvenation calendar. So for me, I block out my meditation and exercise, all the days that I'm doing it. I invite some of my family members to it. I'm like, you can help hold me accountable. So feel free. This is your permission to be like, shouldn't you go to the gym? What, you're saying I'm fat? No, you said I could ask you if you were going to go to the gym today. They have that carte blanche. Self-compassion, as I mentioned, is the big one. So we actually do a lot of work and practices around self-compassion. I think a lot of people suffer with this, but it's really loud in the Catalyst community, because most of us have been told since we were really young, you're too loud, you're too fast, you're a troublemaker, you don't color inside the lines. And so, a lifetime of that feedback can have real consequences. And finally, the other thing that we hear is finding your tribe and how important that is. So as an example, we just finished one of our classes, the Foundry, where we brought together 25 different catalysts. And they will all tell you how helpful all the material was and the homework and all of that stuff. But the thing that they lead with in terms of the value is that they have this global network of peers who just get them. Because it can be exhausting being the only catalyst who thinks this fast, who shows up this way. And these people can literally finish each other's sentences because they have such a deep shared experience. So we created this this 8-week online experiential class. We do 90 minutes of instruction. We give everyone a new peer every week. And then we hold group coaching on Friday, which is optional that people can drop into. And people describe this as like the best 8 weeks that they've invested in changing their lives. But it's because they start to see themselves in the context of a catalyst. They can start to sharpen their superpowers, and they get that tribe support. This is some of the Foundry feedback that I just shared. It's quite possibly the best 8 weeks I've ever made, the single most transformative experience I've ever had. No other words than this. You're changing and supercharging lives. So when catalysts can start to see themselves and identify what is going to make them powerful, it's literally a life-transforming experience. We also have the Galaxy, which is free right now. And these are some of the companies that we have, catalysts coming from. We also have lots of startup people. So an important point that I should say too, which I didn't cover here, is catalysts often don't stay in the same role for very long because we get bored. It's like we've either done the thing, or it's clear that we're not going to do the thing and we're getting burnt out. And so we're much more comfortable to go on to the next thing, even if that's a different role in a new company. We haven't completely done the research, but anecdotally, we're pretty sure that catalysts have a higher percentage of people who go into corporates, into startups, are comfortable with transition. They might go back into corporates at some point, because we're constantly testing new hypotheses and figuring out, well, if I go to a startup and I do this, what does that look like versus a corporate? And so we have people from all different sectors, public, government, education, and startups there as well. And that's it. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'd love any questions, comments, how you relate to being a catalyst.
That's 5 words processing.
Yeah. Sorry, my camera, as you can see, is not working again, but I would like to, if I can start, just imagine I am there because I am here. So first, I really, really, really like your talk. Like, I felt so connected. I'm going to email you for the course that is going to begin in June 2nd, because I love it. That's first. And then second, as a question is, in the line of my consultancy firm, so I have been always in the startup world, very techy, but I'm not techy, but just work with tech people. In the consultancy work, we are just changing into a model where we used to have more companies paying for us to help them generate positioning, not marketing, more like content, really high quality content, articles in Latin America to people, more like the guy that actually wants to talk about his health big company in Latin America and how he's making change. And we struggle with selecting those people. Why? Because sometimes we have people that we are not 100% sure that we want to work with them because of their vibe or because they just work because of money. I'm just being very direct. And we have said no to some of them, not to all of them, to be very sincere. And we would love to actually get more these kind of people, like the catalysts. So that's why I felt so connected with your talk.
Cool.
My specific question is, have you faced this problem when you select? Because I understand you just work with catalysts, but maybe when you just begun, you needed to, I don't know, just choose and be like, oh, should we work with this guy or no? Should we work with him anyways?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we actually have different answers to that. So let me just tell a little last piece about the origin story for some context. So when Tracy and I had that conversation, I had this group called the Global Intrapreneur Salon, which I thought I was curating a group of catalysts, but even that group showed up differently. And so as she was interviewing me, I said, look, this group is burnt out. We need to rent a couple of houses on the coast of Northern California and have a hot tub and some good wine and get us all together. And I was like, do you want to do that with me? And she said yes. And that was actually the birth of Catalyst Constellations. We were specifically dealing with burnout, and we wanted a highly curated group of catalysts who were coming there because we needed people, to your point, that we enjoyed spending time with, who were going to get it, who were not going to be overly disruptive, but instead would actually add to the ease of this community.
Right.
And so, we've continued to do retreats for the last, few years. And for those highly intensive situations, we do a lot of curation. And a lot of people self-select out. Like when you start talking to them about what it is, they can sort of be like, but we have told people that it's, it's not the right fit now. So we go all the way from like highly curated to, if you are leaning into being a catalyst, right now the galaxy is open, because our belief is also, if we're creating a global movement, like who the hell am I to tell anyone that they are a catalyst? I will do that for those highly curated moments, but I also need to let people self-select in. Mm-hmm. And we do have, we have the research and the tools, if we are working with like large organizations, to go and identify like the most catalytic people, who are the people that we want to start working with. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've also a question. First of all, thank you for an inspiring talk. I really felt connected and a lot of points to understand it a little bit more, what's happening around me. And just thinking about, as I'm a brand freak, because I think brand is really useful to have a great vision and communicate it and bring it to people. It's a kind of tool for that. Do you think that a brand could also help catalysts to bring the message across internally in the company, or do you think that couldn't be a right tool?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, so let me start talking, and you can tell me if I'm on track. We often get a question about which companies are catalyst-friendly companies, and there aren't many right now. But I think that there are companies that would like to be seen as supporting these people. And so what we're working with organizations to do is to create almost like brand goodwill around being a catalyst-friendly place. Because increasingly in the war for talent and in this new VUCA reality, they are starting to recognize that they need these people there. Does that get to your point?
Maybe some more specific. There are some bigger companies which create internal brands for their change programs.
Yes.
I thought it could be.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. So that was an experience that I had with building the Innovation Champion program at Vodafone. I always talked about 50% of my job was marketing and 50% of that was internal. And we did create it. I mean, you have to walk that line that I was just talking about, being exclusive and being inclusive at the same time. So like we had created, as an example, these Innovation Champion business cards that were shaped like light bulbs. And back in the day, they had a QR code. Like, they were cool back then, right? Nobody uses business cards much anymore. But, and they were, when customers saw them, they would literally light up. They'd be like, wow, like CEOs from all over the world were like, that's so cool. So our executives started wanting them. And we were like, no, you can't have one. You're not part of the Innovation Champion program. If they became sponsors of the Innovation Champion program, we would consider it, and we did give a couple out. So I do think that brand plays a huge role in making this and making these movements. And like we think about all the time. I mean, I've got my little Catalyst Constellation shirt on. It has the word Catalyst, and my like 19-year-old son came into the kitchen yesterday and he tried to take two because he's like, that's so cool. So 100% the brand is important. And the cool thing is that starts to actually leap outside of the organization to your customers if you do it the right way. And that's where I go back to sort of the brand and goodwill and employment, and customer engagement piece. And also because generally catalysts, because we show up loving design thinking and all of the methodologies that would lead us towards talking to customers as the first sort of port of call, the customers and the catalysts get to know each other really well in a deep and meaningful way. So yes.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Thank you for the presentation. It was super interesting. I saw some of my own traits there. I feel like, yes, maybe in some ways I'm a catalyst, but I feel like maybe I haven't quite been able to do what I need to do in various things that I've tried to do in my life. Possibly I haven't met the right people for my team. Maybe I'm, undisciplined and chaotic. So do you have any, as I saw so many things about myself described there, and probably you can, like, you've seen all types of these people. Maybe you have some general pointers besides to just like be more disciplined?
Yeah, I mean, the be more disciplined thing, so it is why we created the Foundry. And I will tell you, like, I've been doing this work with my partner, Tracy, for a couple of years as sort of our side passion project. We always knew we were going to be coming to do this full time in 2020. But even in my role at Ericsson, I fell into my own bad habits because they're so intrinsic to us. And the thrill, like that whole energy curve is real. I obviously felt, really transparently, I felt a conflict of bringing Tracy in to support me because she was my business partner on the side. But I wish that I had done something like that, to have partnered with someone who could see the challenges that I was having in my normal way of operating in a Catalyst and just gotten me to sit down. And this is why coaching is really helpful, because it doesn't feel like the same kind of rejuvenation things that we might otherwise do for ourselves. Like, yes, going to the gym or, meditating for me really helps me slow down the process. But often as catalysts, we won't invest that time and that slowing down in ourselves because it feels like it's not in service of us accomplishing the goal. You're like, well, I needed to work 12 hours today to make that thing happen. It's like, actually, if you had slowed down a little bit, you could have probably worked 9 and been more effective. But what we often are more likely to give ourselves, because it's in the guise of making us more efficient, is the coaching. And so the coaching can be a great support mechanism to remind you and give you, it's not about being disciplined, it's just having someone support you on the process, right? The other thing is, and you brought this up, is finding your catalyst tribe. So when we get on these calls, Tracy and I often, someone will ask a question and we will let the group, share best practices for 10 minutes. Because as you guys are all seeing, once you see that shared experience, it's like you all have answers to all of these things too. We've all succeeded and we've all failed at something at this point in our lives. So let's let the tribe support each other. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to talk to you more offline about it, Jeffrey.
Great, thank you.
There's a lot behind your question.
Shannon,
I have a question too.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah. What's happened if you are talking with HR people about this, or with organization developers? What's happened then? What's the reaction of them?
Again, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. The thing that makes me sad, and my personal mission is to identify a pipeline of, or the current and or pipeline of leaders who understand the importance of value of this, because there are not enough of those leaders today. The good news is that there are things like Google who are articulating some of the foundational things that would supercharge a catalyst but are good for everyone, like psychological safety and creative time and all of those things. I think, and we're connected into people who have other sorts of catalyst work all over the world. I think what we're seeing is we're starting to see the acceleration of companies start to understand this, but it's not fast enough for me. There's an interesting point here. So 2 questions we often get from catalysts are, how do I know what job to go look for, what company to go look for? Are there catalyst friendly companies already, and what questions do I ask when I'm in the interview process? There's a lot that's behind that, and we can give them answers. And one of the challenges about even executives who get this is, and think that they want it, if they are not really catalysts, when the actual change, like the systems change, starts to be required to implement the vision, they often retract away from that. And that's almost impossible to identify in early stages of either looking for a new job or moving to a different team or whatever. So that's why we say, like, there's no promise that we can make catalysts that you're not going to burn out, because the world is just not like, the world is created sort of for homeostasis. But we hope that we can make catalysts more successful by identifying the right organizations and giving them the tools to communicate their value in their process. And also, even if all of that doesn't work out, have the self-compassion and rejuvenation process to fall back on so that they don't internalize it all.
I have one question. I feel very much, I can strongly resonate with what you're saying. And I feel like, oh yeah, I guess I'm a catalyst. But also I'm very good at self-sabotaging. Now, I didn't see that on your map. And I feel like, is this something at catalysts, because they're so strong in going ahead leading, that they're also kind of maybe sometimes leading in wrong directions, just to figure out how that feels or where this is going? Is there something like a
Yes.
factor of self-sabotaging, or where would you put that on the map?
Yes, totally. I mean, it's, you know, like the way we describe self-sabotaging, it's usually a very unconscious process, and there's a lot of reasons and ways that that manifests. I think it goes to Jeffrey's point too, about like the chaos that we can create and the lack of self-awareness that we can have. So 100% yes. Connected with that is the imposter syndrome that we have, because we are often actually creating something totally net new. And so that can be a self-sabotaging thing, because we may either not fully drink our own Kool-Aid or believe the story, or overly drink our own Kool-Aid and not stop and listen. And so I just come back to, this is where having that pause and rejuvenation. Am I doing it right? Is the team on board? Do I have the right vision? Have I brought in enough empathy? The more that you can inject these pauses into your process as a catalyst, the more successful you will be. And I would say there's lots of other ways that we self-sabotage. So I mentioned that catalysts have so many ideas. One thing that we do is we hold ourselves accountable to these phantom goals. So Tracy noticed as she was coaching catalysts, she would sit down and she'd be like, okay, we're going to make your 8-week goals or whatever, and we'll come back and we'll check in. And she would come back and check in with them, and she'd be like, well, how did you do? And they'd be like, well, I totally failed. And then she would sort of uncover with them that actually they had done most of the things that they said that they were going to do, and the catalyst had forgotten, but there were these 10 other things that we were holding ourselves accountable for that we hadn't put on the paper the first time. So we call these phantom goals. And so this is why I mentioned earlier, prioritization and being honest with yourself about all of the things that you're trying to do is really important, because then you can start to make really intentional choices. I have 10 things I could be working on. I'm only going to work on these 5 right now. I'm not going to let these go. I'm going to put them on the whiteboard on the other side and constantly come back and see if those are the things that I want to work on. And then once you get the clarity, then you can go, is this the right vision? And so this is all about like the clarity and the combination of the clarity and the rejuvenation that make us successful.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Any more questions? We still have some time. Or is there something where you feel like usually this is what people ask and it's not been asked in this group?
Looks like
Marcus has raised his hand.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted. Yeah.
I have a question, Shannon. I thought that was fantastic, but it's sort of almost saying that if you're a catalyst, you're going to find it very hard to stay long-term doing one thing in any one organization. If you do, you're probably going to break things so you can fix them again. And I was just looking at your background. You've had 10 different roles so far. And so I'm guessing that for a catalyst, they have to accept that maybe their journey is not going to be going down the corporate route to become, you know, senior vice president of American Express or something like that, but instead to have a wonderful time and not be upset or embarrassed about the fact that you might have had 20 or 30 jobs by the time you're 50 or 60. Just seems like a slightly different.
Yes. Some people do stay. It depends on the roles that you get in. So some people do stay because they can stay in that role and find new challenges. If that role is the right role, find new challenges that they continue to cut their teeth on. But 100%, like I said, I mean, we see more job changes, I think, in the catalyst population than the average bear. I think your point about the self-compassion of like, you know, if there's this standard that you're working to, that you're supposed to, you know, stay in one role for 10 years and that feels bad because you're not actually doing that. The self-compassion can be, you know, really helpful. But I think, you know, helping catalysts see, like you know, when I started at Ericsson and everyone knew this was like on the table. I'm like, I'm an early stage person. I'm not gonna stay for 10 years. Like we had that conversation with the president and the head of HR, and everyone knows that. So it's like how you start to articulate the role that you're playing can also be really helpful. But yeah, I agree.
And so the follow-up from that is that the HR or the hiring people have to say it's a success to get someone as a catalyst who spends 18 months, as opposed to it being a failure because you spent all that time recruiting someone and they cleared off after a year or 18 months. And in fact, that's exactly right.
And so I am super passionate about reimagining HR, and I've said this for a long time. HR is like the talent matching system is so broken across the world. It's super opportunistic. Like someone gets bored at their job or they need to leave for whatever reason. And so at that specific time and moment, you're like looking, it's like a dating thing. Do my things fit yours? Oh, not quite, but good enough. And then we have these weird expectations about what that next relationship is supposed to look like. And I think as we hopefully normalize, you know, how catalysts show up and the value that they can have, that we can start to have those other conversations. I mean, there was a point when I was considering, I mean, we're writing a book, and so it's pretty clear that I was always coming to Catalyst Constellations this year. But there was a point when it was like, the next problem that I need to solve is the process transformation piece at Ericsson, because that's what, you know, when I started to rub up against the resistance, that was the thing. And so there are ways that organizations can start to have sort of like more flux capabilities. So it's like, okay, well, you did that. It's not bad that you aren't going to be the EVP of emerging business anymore. We now need to transform your role and to do this new problem that you've identified. And most organizations aren't set up for that kind of flux and adaptability.
Well, yeah. I have a question. If the catalysts will increase, do you think it will be a proficiency?
A what?
A proficiency. So you get a job description and someone is looking for this person.
Oh yeah, proficiency in a job description. We're playing around with that. I mean, one of the things that our team has looked at is, you know, like Catalyst certifications as an example, or certifying businesses. You know, there's sort of like the 100 best places to work, the 100 top innovation companies. Like, will there be sort of Catalyst friendly certifications for organizations? I don't know. I hope so. And like I said to your earlier question, I do see the starting of executives thinking differently about the different types of people and profile and job roles. To your description, you know, your question, Marcus. I hope so, I guess, is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question. So I really like that you really added to the process the idea of wellness or awakening the subconsciousness, and that's like part fundamental of this process, which is actually something that caught my attention. So how do you approach when you get to a big company, for example, that could be your client, and you say like, this is the process, this is what we're gonna do, and let me just tell you that we have also an empathy part, you know, like a wellness, self-meditation. How do you manage that?
I bring it in unapologetically. So when I was at Ericsson, and even before this, when I speak at MIT, like I will hold a couple minutes of silence, and I don't need to use the word mindfulness necessarily. And I can just ask people to close their eyes and be present and connect with their breath, just as a starting point. When I curate any kind of like co-creation, visioning exercise or whatever, I choose places where we have access to nature, that the place is inspiring. For all of my team offsites, I brought yoga instructors in for, you know, optional for the morning. Of course, being the boss, there's a lot of pressure for people to come, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't mandatory. So I think the good news is that is also starting to get normalized in the corporate context. But I think just, you know, wearing it unapologetically, but finding language that's universal. And, you know, like I will be in Texas with all of these, like, you know, 50-something-year-old white guys from Texas, and having them do a mindfulness practice. And that's what we do. And people come up to me after, like I had this one guy who worked for me, and he's like, I had never done yoga before. It changed my life. Thank you for that. So
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time and sharing with us. I have to admit, I'm blown. I have to revisit the recording and rewatch sections, because I had like so many aspects where my thoughts stuck to it while you continued talking. I feel like I need to we'd watch the same thing 5 times to get all the aspects of it.
It's a lot, and I'm super thankful for the opportunity, you guys. Feel free to join us on the Galaxy, on the network, or the Foundry. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat.
Thank you so
and
much.
Say hi to Mario. I saw that you were talking with Mario. I haven't talked with him in years. Tell him I say hi.
We will meet him tomorrow at the last session.
Awesome.
Shannon, have a beautiful
have fun, guys.
rest for you. It's morning.
Bye.
Thanks for all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.